Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, how the Timberwolves can make a, quote, major leap this year. ESPN's words, not mine, but I'll explain why, if they do make a major leap, why that will happen. It's all upcoming next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hopefully you've had a fantastic start to your week. Today on the show, we're going to talk a bit about an ESPN piece is what spurred this thought, talking about teams that can make a major leap this year. And I'll explain in a second about the piece, but I'll give my reasons why, if the Wolves, if that's how this year is going to go, the Wolves are going to make a, quote, major leap as a team that just made the conference finals in consecutive years. What has happened if that's the case? The easy answer is Anthony Edwards. And yeah, that's where we're going to start. But that's not the only thing. There's a lot of things that would have to go right if this team is going to take such a leap this year. We'll build the case here today on the show. First, though, a big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right, let's jump right in today. So what got me thinking about this angle of the Timberwolves offseason and the Wolves roster and the state of the upcoming season is this article on ESPN, their summer forecast 2025-26. The headline says that, and then it also says turnarounds, turbulent teams, and the biggest questions. So ESPN asks what they call their panel, their summer forecast panels made up of NBA insiders, doesn't give us anything else about like who these people are, but it's probably all the same people you see on TV and on ESPN.com. And the way they did it is a first place vote for each of these things received 5 points, a second place vote 3 points, and a third place vote 1. Okay, so keep that in mind. The very first question in the article, which by the way is the only one that mentioned the Wolves, there's a question that's which team will take a tumble. There were 5 teams mentioned, no Timberwolves. Which superstar, who is the next superstar to request a trade? Thankfully, no Timberwolves players mentioned. Go Zion, Giannis, LeBron, Ja, and then Trae Young. Which superstar injury will have the biggest impact in the East? Obviously, no Wolves mentioned. And then will we get a different champion for the 8th straight season? Which, interestingly, only 15 of the 26 people said yes. Well, you can see that interesting on both sides. Like, obviously, the Thunder are the prohibitive favorite, but also for more than half the people to think there's going to be a back-to-back champion is kind of crazy, too. When you either way you want to look at it, which team is most likely to make a big move before the deadline? Obviously, the Wolves not mentioned there. So the only one that mentions the Timberwolves is team turnaround. Which teams will make a major leap? Okay, the Timberwolves finished 4th in the voting with 6 points, a distant 4th. Number 1 was actually a tie between the Spurs and Hawks for obvious reasons, Wemby reasons for the Spurs, and obviously Stephon Castle. People like the Dylan Harper pick. They added some veteran I think they'll be good. I don't know about the biggest turnaround. I'm still a little bit dubious that it'll happen so rapidly for them. The Hawks, I get that, tied for first. Then it goes Sixers, Magic with 48 points, third. The Wolves are 4th, but with 6 points. The Rockets are 5th with 5 points. For a couple things here. One, I mean, the Rockets were the 2 seed and the Wolves made the conference final. So it makes sense that they wouldn't be any higher on this list, but it's intriguing to me that they both got votes. The way the voting works, first place vote gets 5 points, second place gets 3 points, and a third place gets 1. So the two possibilities here, I believe my math serves me correctly, is somebody voted for the Wolves for first place as the most likely team to make a major leap, and then somebody gave them a third place vote, or they got 2 second place votes as the team. Another way to look at this would be the second most likely team to make a major leap this year. Fascinating. Right? Like the Wolves would even be mentioned, and frankly, also the Rockets. I think it's weird when you finish. I know they got knocked out early in the playoffs, but to finish second in the conference and, think that there's a chance for a, quote, major leap. Now, for the Wolves, they only won 49 games the regular season. And we're gonna talk about the math of that and why they underperformed, underdelivered based on their Pythagorean win-loss record. I've got a couple interesting things to talk about related to that. But clearly, the number one reason why anybody would expect the Wolves to make a leap this season is Anthony Edwards' continued emergence as a superstar. There's no two ways about it. Like, that is the reason. I mean, just a couple of years ago, the Timberwolves beat the Thunder in the play-in. And obviously they've made changes since then. Adding Hartenstein was huge. Adding Caruso is huge. Um, J-Dub developing further is huge. A lot of things changed. But the number one thing is SGA went from a star to an absolute superstar and one of the best two players in the NBA. Anthony Edwards has gone from a really electric rookie to a volume scorer to an all-star to now back-to-back NBA, all-NBA second team appearances. And the scoring has increased every year. The three-point shooting has increased. He, volume-wise, was easily the best three-point shooter in the league, led the league in makes and takes, which is hard to do, and was nearly 40% outside the arc. Still good in the paint, still good from everywhere, and he added a playmaking element to his game over the last two seasons. The assist rate just this last year wasn't quite as high as the year prior, but the turnover rate basically held steady, and he shot a lot more threes. He scored overall. I can make the argument he was more efficient. I mean, true shooting percentage was up for Anthony Edwards, and the effective field goal percentage was up. So overall, a more efficient scoring season. But he sacrificed a little on the free throw side, and I thought the defense slipped a little. We talked about this the other day. So what needs to happen for him to make the proverbial leap this year? Now, there are many leaps. This is the next one. The next one is defense more consistently. It's getting to the line a little bit more to get you to that 30-point per game mark. I mean, he finished last season. It's an arbitrary threshold. It's not actually arbitrary. It's a literal number, but you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really matter if you score 30 or more. I mean, most MVPs do, right? Like, if you want to think about it that way. He averaged 27.6 points per game last year, which was up nearly 2 points per game over the year prior, that was up about 1.5 points since the year before that. So more free throws is going to get him to that 30-point plateau. And honestly, like, you don't need to be a great defender to win MVP. We know that. But that's, to me, that will also help the Wolves make this leap, which then makes him a viable candidate, right? If he's better defensively, the Wolves will be a better team. And if they're a better team, he's going to get more. He'll have a better shot at All-NBA first team. We talked about this the other day. The article, actually, I think this was a different specific ESPN writer, was talking about how virtually every All-NBA team, I think it was like every team but one in the last 21 years or something that's won the finals, has had a first-team All-NBA guy either that season or somebody who had been one the prior year before. The Wolves don't have anybody on their team that's ever been an All-NBA first team. Julius Randle was third team. I think Rudy made a couple of third teams, and obviously Ant, as we just said, has made 2 second teams. So if Ant's going to be and he was 6th in voting the last 2 years. So if he's going to be a top 5 player in All-NBA voting and make All-NBA first team, if he's going to have a shot at MVP, the Wolves need to be better. And the fastest way they can do that is him improving the offense a little bit more and being a little more consistent defensively. And along with that, being better in clutch situations, which is, again, a little more arbitrary than we'd like to think. Like, we can throw around clutch stats, and I know Ant did not have a good shooting percentage in the final, however you want to slice it, final 2 minutes of regulation or overtime. He's actually been better defensively in those moments than offensively. Of course, 2 years ago, the block against the Pacers. Last year, the block against OKC on the road. But he's got to be a little better offensively in the clutch down the stretch to help the Wolves win some of these close games, which we will talk about. But I'd say clutch performance, defensive consistency, and then related to both those things, playoff performance for Ant. That leap is what's going to take the Wolves to the next level in the playoffs. And again, his individual stock as well. Those reasons, that's the biggest reason I got to believe why people think the Wolves will make a leap. But I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more things to talk about. And a couple I'm really going to dig in on for why I do think the Wolves will be better. And I'm going to take the over on what the over-under is. I haven't given my official win total projection, but I will be taking the over, and why I think this could be a really good year for Minnesota and why they could take this, quote, major leap. We'll talk about all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. August 26th, that is today, is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. Preseason's over, but regular season doesn't start for another, 9 days? But who's counting? For just 24 hours today, so less than 24 hours when you're listening to this, depending on how early in the morning you're listening, maybe not a lot less than 24 hours. FanDuel's giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, this is your moment. Take a flyer in the MVP race. I know unpopular, but Jordan Love, I think, was plus 2,000 last time I looked at FanDuel. Not bad. If you really don't want to do that, there's some other options out there. If you're a Vikings fan and you can't bring yourself to do it, there are other options out there. Maybe you just want to crown your champ in August, right? Like, who's going to win it all this year? Is it going to be one of the same teams that just seems to always win it over the last several years, and the Eagles or Chiefs, or is it somebody else? You could also parlay your division winner dark horses, whatever you want to do. Today is the day to do it. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only, and that day is today. FanDuel, play your game. Hey, right now, check out our Locked On survey that's ongoing right now. We have a very important request related to this. If you're watching on YouTube, see it there at the bottom of your screen. There's a QR code. There's a URL. It's an important request that Locked On has for you. Locked On wants to hear from you. We put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't like, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see the QR right there. And if you're listening, that is lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. If you're listening to the audio, the link is right there. So check that out. Thank you. Big thank you for helping us out. All right. So the ant leap is the obvious way, the obvious path for Minnesota to get to where they want to go, to make this leap. The other thing that I think is a pretty obvious one is the fact that the Timberwolves' actual core is really quite young. I mean, Anthony Edwards was 23 years old last season. He just turned 24 this summer, actually just a couple of weeks ago. And then you look at the rest of who I would consider the core. I mean, obviously Rudy Gobert, aging star, Julius Randle, shorter term guy who's in the back half of the prime of his career, not the back half of his career necessarily, but the back half of his prime. And yeah, obviously Mike Conley, but you wouldn't call him part of the core, right? So who's the core? Well, it's Anthony Edwards. The next thing we got to think of is Jaden McDaniels. Jaden McDaniels is entering his age 25 season. Naz Reid's the other one, because they just keep giving him extensions and he's going to be here for at least another 2 or 3 years. He's going to enter his age 26 season. So I think a lot of people would consider the prime NBA years, 26 to 29, plus or minus a year, right? Like that's kind of the prime of an NBA player's career. Naz is entering that right now, 25 to 26. Jaden's not quite there, 24 to 25. And Ant is even a year younger than that. The core of this team is still really young. And they've been to consecutive conference finals. For each of these guys to have 6 playoff series under their belt, and actually more than that. I mean, Jaden was injured the year before the Wall incident. But even more than that for Jaden, you add in the play-in and the Nuggets series that season, and same thing for Naz Reid. Actually, Naz was hurt that year too. But those guys all have that additional experience despite their youth. They are experienced. And frankly, half of the rotation, like obviously the jury's out on some of these younger guys, whether it's Terrence Shannon Jr., who's actually not that young, but he's young in terms of NBA experience, Rob Dillingham, Jalen Clark, who's somewhere in the middle there. There's we don't know how that's going to turn out for those guys, but say that they hit on 2 of those 3 and they become actual real rotation guys. And there's painful youth in the form of Berenger, the eventual Gobert replacement, likely, and maybe Dillingham is the Conley replacement, maybe he's not. But say they hit on 1 or 2 of those guys and they become part of this core, the second wave of guys behind Ant and Jaden. I mean, obviously keeping them together longer term is the next step, but if those guys are better or as good as they hope they're going to be, or better than a lot of people expect them to be, this is a young core that's going to naturally improve. And that's my point. My point isn't necessarily beyond this year. This conversation is about the leap for 2025-26. And you have to, I shouldn't say you have to assume, but in this case, it's fair to assume natural improvement because the Timberwolves have had a track record, shockingly, under Chris. And I don't. This is a knock at the organization, not because I didn't think Chris Finch and his staff would develop players, but bucking the trend of years and years and decades, frankly, of Timberwolves futility, the Wolves have actually developed these guys. You could obviously some credit is deserved to the Timberwolves coaching staff for Anthony Edwards. The progression for Jaden McDaniels, the progression for Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker's career rejuvenation. The Timberwolves coaching staff has helped to develop all of these guys. And so it's fair. I think it is fair to assume natural progression and improvement for this young core of Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Reid. These guys should all continue to get better. And therefore, the team should be better this year. Right? I think that makes a ton of sense. And actually related to that, I'll make my next point as well here. One of the other things I have listed is the upside of Terrence Shannon Jr. and Rob Dillingham, to a lesser extent, Jalen Clark. I mean, there's certainly some upside there, and we don't know how the rotation is going to shake out sitting here in late August, but there's upside there. Like, this team might have a slightly lower floor than last year's because we don't know what Shannon and Dillingham are going to do to replace Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Nickeil Alexander-Walker was a known quantity. We knew what we were going to get from Nickeil last year, right? And we got it. There's a chance that these guys all are terrible this year and there's whatever other issues and the floor is lower. But there's also the upside. And I would err on the side of the upside because the upside for TJ Shannon we've seen already. I think he already has the floor of a rotation NBA player. Rob Dillingham does not. His floor is lower, but the upside's higher. If Rob Dillingham becomes prime Jamal Crawford over this year, it's probably not going to happen. But if it happens this season, look out, right? Like the sky's the limit for this team. And so I think that upside is absolutely tantalizing. Like the Wolves kind of had this window last year of, all right, unless Ant was going to go supernova last season, there was only so much upside to last year's team. You're also adding the fact you're introducing Randle and DiVincenzo in place of Karl-Anthony Towns on the eve of training camp. And like the cap of last year's team, I thought they'd win less games. I remember 2 years ago, they won 56 games. Last year, I think I picked them to win 54 and they won 49. This year, I haven't made my pick yet, but I think they're going to be better than they were last year for a lot of the reasons I've listed. And this upside, this ceiling of what this team could be is tantalizing. It's last year we kind of knew this team's going to win, between high 40s and mid 50s. And I think you could make the case this team has a higher upside than that because we don't know how good TJ Shannon, Rob Dillingham could be. The Wolves already have a couple of 6-man guys in Reid and Dante DiVincenzo, like dudes that could legit, and not in Nas's case, have already won 6-man of the year. Like Nas and Dante, either one of them could go to almost any team in the league and be the best 6-man or the best bench guy on that team and start for the majority of teams. No question. I mean, Chris Finch said it all the time last year. We've got 8 starters on this team. Well, I would argue that Mike Conley isn't that caliber anymore, but he is in actual name and role a starter. But TJ Shannon could very well be in that same category of like, look, this guy could start on a bunch of teams and he'd be the best bench guy on some teams too. Rob Dillingham is the ultimate, there's a much higher high and a much lower low. I shouldn't say much higher high, but I think clearly a higher high and a lower low than Terrence Shannon. And again, Jalen Clark is going to be your more, we know the defense is going to be outstanding. The offense is just going to depend on if he keeps making open threes or not, but there's some limited offensive upside there. So I just think that's fascinating. I've got 3 more things I want to mention. One is related to the math I mentioned at the beginning of the show. So we'll hit on that, and then I'll give you 2 other reasons why the Wolves could make a leap this season. It's all upcoming here next to close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about it. Think about the last time that you had an urgent need. Maybe you needed a plumber or some other kind of service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You probably moved on. That's what most people would do. It's what I would do. And that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. OpenPhone lets you manage business calls and texts from a single app. The shared inbox feature is a game changer. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. Plus, their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so that you never miss a customer. OpenPhone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OpenPhone, OpenPhone.com/LockedOnNBA. If you have any existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right. You see there if you're watching on YouTube. I talked about young core, talked about rotation upside. Let's talk about math. Math would be the other thing. I talked about 2 years ago, Timberwolves won 56 games, right? Last year, they won 49 games. Last season, when they won 56, their Pythagorean win-loss record or related a similar statistic over at Basketball Reference, it's basically the same thing as expected win-loss. It's based on the point differential. A point differential gives you a pretty good snapshot of how good a team is, right? Like early in the season, if somebody's got a point differential that's, a plus whatever, but they're 500 and they're like a plus 10, it's pretty clear they've played better than their record, right? And over the course of the season, it evens out. And I've heard the arguments against. You'll occasionally hear TV announcers, and you hear this in baseball announcers, like, I don't trust that stat because, well, there's a blowout. And then what happens? Well, guess what? It all comes out in the wash. The better teams will blow out worse teams more often than the other way around, right? Like that's how math works. So it's a pretty good indicator if a team is underperforming or overperforming, how good they actually are. So when they were a 56 win team, their expected win loss was actually 57, according to Basketball Reference. This last season, 24-25, they only won 49 games, but their expected win loss was 53. So they were 4 games worse than what you'd expect. And to give some context, only twice in the last 15 years have the Timberwolves had a bigger difference. Like go back in time, 22-23 under Chris Finch, they were 1 game better than their Pythagorean. So it's not like they're consistently worse. Same thing the year before that. They won, the year before that, they were actually 2 games worse. So they won 46. They should have won 48. That was the first round loss to Memphis when they were the 6th seed in the first full season under Chris Finch. The split Saunders-Finch year, that was COVID-shortened year number 2. They were 1 game worse than they expected. Ryan Saunders' only full year, the year that ended with the COVID pandemic, the Timberwolves were actually 5 games worse than their expected win-loss. So that was kind of crazy. So that's a 1 game. Last year, they were 4 games worse. That year, they were 5 games worse. That's one of the examples when it was a bigger gap. The year that Tibbs got fired, they were 1 game worse than expected. That was the year Saunders took over. The year before that, with Tibbs, they were right in line. The year before that, under Tibbs, they were somehow 7 games worse than their expected win-loss under Tom Thibodeau. This is the 16-17 season. Okay, and then there was the Adelman season. They were 6 games worse. You have to go all the way back to what season was that? But they were 8 games worse in 13-14. Remember the Rubio torn ACL year, the Kevin Love year when he was awesome. They were 8 games worse. There was an Adelman year, they were 8 games worse. There was a Tibbs year, they were 7 games worse. And then there was a 5-game worse year, the weird COVID year. They were 4 games worse. So you got to go back 13 years. And there's only 2 other instances of them being significantly, a bigger gap than that. By the way, importantly, the Wolves in that whole span were never more than 2 games better, which tells you a couple things. 1, bad luck. We know that. 2, bad clutch performance. Both of those things are reasons, or both those elements are elements that I think the Wolves could improve this year. I think the Wolves probably could have some better luck in some of these close late game situations. The execution's got to improve. And I do feel like we have said that a little bit too much. Chris Finch is a great coach, and I am a Chris Finch defender through and through. It is ridiculous how many people think he doesn't know what he's doing. The guy's been to consecutive conference finals, seems to be going okay for him. And I'd like you to find 5 coaches that you'd rather have in the NBA than Chris Finch. And if you think you found 5, I'd probably challenge you on that, right? How many guys would you really rather have than Chris Finch? But it doesn't mean he's above criticism. And I think it's fair to say the Wolves haven't always succeeded I mean, the numbers would prove that they haven't always succeeded in close late end of game situations. Now, ultimately, it's the players that are executing or not. And we already talked about ants in clutch situations, but it's the coach's job to prep the team for the situations. And then obviously the actual ATOs, and the team still has to execute them. There were a couple times where the Wolves clearly didn't run the play that was called, or they ran it sloppily. And then at that point, it's like, how do you blame Chris Finch? These dudes got to figure it out. If this is the play and they ran it well in practice or whatever, why can't they, they've got to they can't be absolved of the blame. That said, there is some coaching elements to it, right? Like if this is the case over an extended period of time, then there is certainly some coaching staff blame. But I also think more often than not, it's more luck than anything else. And it's impossible to really parse that. But I think grand scheme, the math would suggest it's going to bounce back the other way a little bit. I'm not saying they'll be 4 or 5 games better than their Pythagorean, but they might be a game or two better. And if they get a little better in clutch situations and some of this other stuff happens, then yeah, I mean, that could be a meaningful difference. But the Wolves are a better team than their 49 wins last year. And turns out, and I know they had some good luck with the Steph injury, obviously bad luck for Steph and the Warriors, but good fortune, I should say, when it came to not having to face Steph in the second round. But I mean, they still beat the Lakers in 5, and they still beat the Warriors in 5, and made to the conference finals. And yes, once again, ran out of gas. And that brings me back to my first point with Ant. A couple more things that I would add. I would say relative health. And in terms of like injured games lost, I think the Wolves were actually not that terrible last year. And they were fortunate to not have anybody gone for more than like a month and a half, but they had several of these like month-long injuries. Dante, Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert, and less long absences for guys like Nas, etc. And they've been very fortunate, knock on wood, to not have a long-term Ant injury. He's had some nagging stuff, but who hasn't? So, if they could avoid having these overlapping month-long absences, which, maybe you could expect it from a guy like Rudy at his age, or a guy like even Julius Randle at the age of 30 and the way he plays and the body type he has, perhaps, the Dante thing was pretty much bad luck more than anything else. And if you could have a little bit better injury luck, relative health throughout the season, that's going to help. My last thing would be something that we started to see after the flip of the calendar to 2025 last season, which was a new philosophy. This the only X's and O's thing other than the late game execution that I have, which is the philosophy on the glass. The Timberwolves began crashing the glass partway through the season, and it's a bit of more of a league-wide trend, a zag that no longer is zagging because everyone's starting to do it. But the philosophy of, look, hey, if teams are trying to get out and run on the defensive glass, then, that means, say there's 2 guys running, that means there's only 3 guys back rebounding. And are they really all trying to rebound? So if we crash with 5 or 4 or what have you, then, that plus the inherent advantage of an offensive player is already facing the rim. You can see where the shot's coming from. You can see where it's likely to go. And it sounds crazy, but like that's a real thing. And then training your guys to understand, like, if the shot goes up on this side, a rebound, more often than not, the rebound's going to be in this area. And there's technique to that. And then there's also just doing it and the effort level. And so that renewed focus for Minnesota led them, a team that typically has not been a very good rebounding team, to be a really good rebounding team last year. I mean, that's what ended up happening. The cleaning the glass number had the Timberwolves in the top 10 in defensive rebound rate. I have the basketball reference one in front of me, which is slightly different, but it had the Wolves 12th in defensive rebound rate, but I'm confident they were top 10 in cleaning the glass. And then on offensive rebound rate, they were 14th last year, and it was all said and done according to basketball reference. Same thing. I think they were a little bit higher on cleaning the glass. And for them to be top half on both ends of the floor in rebounding is big. And I think over the course of an entire season and an offseason and a training camp with more of a focus on the technique on the offensive glass, how to get some easier buckets, that's going to have a difference next year. And I think ultimately a positive impact on what the Wolves are doing. So that's the case for the Wolves to make, again, what ESPN calls a major leap next year. I think what we'll do tomorrow is the opposite. A bit of a downer show, admittedly, but we could do that, compare it to this one. If the Wolves are worse, if they're a close to 500 team, a play-in team, what happened? What went wrong? Outside of injuries, and I'm not saying depth can't be included, because I think it's one thing to say, man, if Ant gets hurt, this is a 40-win team. Yeah, probably even worse than that. But what if the nagging injuries things happen? And it's more of a layered depth question and things like that. So I'm not saying that won't be part of it, but we'll go through the opposite side of this. Like what went off the rails if this year does in fact go off the rails? What caused it to go off the rails? So we'll do that on tomorrow's show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder that for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On NBA podcast. Absolutely no offseason over there. Our guys, Doug, Matt, and Hayes will keep you up to date on all things, everything related to the NBA offseason. You can find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Of course, just like this show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, also your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.